Hello and welcome to another video. So today we're taking a look at Mysteria Rune again. We did this one a little while ago, but this has been updated slightly with a bit better consistency, especially with, Witch of Forsight really pulling its weight, and even Magic Mentor not being as bad as I would have initially thought it was in this deck. Of course, it's still a little awkward, and I think it would just take time to get used to it. And I highly would recommend running 3 Mysteria Founder if you've got them. I only have 2 unfortunately, and I'm not crafting a third just for this deck in particular, but I did just throw in an extra snowman compared to the original deck list. Obviously it's still really good. 3 snowmen give you both extra storm damage and a great ward setup. And really this deck just really benefits from spell damage. Even without a Mysteria boost, you can still keep your opponent on the ropes long enough to drag out a game. A lot of the time I've found the games are reasonably close and coming down to me using my last lot of spells, but for the most part, not too bad at all. Very easy to make a couple of misplays when playing Nova Flare, as you'll see in my video here, that dealing 2 damage to all followers, very easy to forget that sometimes it does affect your own board and doesn't just hit your opponent like many other AoEs actually do. So we'll get right into it and take a look. So the first deck off the rank is against Sword. Sword is extremely popular and no surprise, it's still extremely strong. Both aggro and mid-range variants do pretty well in the current meta, and honestly that's not too shocking considering what they got. This deck does reasonably well because it does run a lot of removal and a lot of block cards, which make it hard for Sword really to build a board that they can consistently use. But outside of that, if they have a good turn 1 through 3, it can be quite hard to counter. Of course, them not having any kind of 1-drop is to my benefit, which always works out nicely for me. And Bladed Hedgehog really isn't a huge problem when you consider what I've got in my hand. Being able to use Magic Missile now to face for 1, not give them anything to target on the board, and allow me to use Absolute Zero Blade on this Hedgehog next turn should be enough to at least secure us ahead of the game. Of course, this Princess Juliet does make it a little bit harder, which is no surprise. I mean, it is a Storm Follower, which is what Sword pretty much does. They're one of the few classes that does have low-cost Storm cards. Blood had a few and still has only, I think, 1 now that was really kind of low-cost Storm, outside of course, Old Blood King Bat. But Sword really just has value-orientated ones that can go face very, very easily. So Nova Flare, great for that. Removing that board was perfect. This Cavalier though, always annoying. Gives them both healing and a board, which is quite irritating. I mean, they did only heal 1, but 1 is still enough to really cause some issues. Lucky for us, we do get our Mysteria Founder out, which is great. Being able to get the early spell boost, especially on curve, really does help your matchups. So being able to trade this and only leave a couple of 1/1s up really makes this a fair fight at this point. Lancer with Bane is reasonably okay, especially when we have Magic Missile and stuff in our hand anyway, although it does deal 2 damage now, which is awesome. It's still more beneficial to just use on the Lancer, remove their potential damage and boost our Snowmen, ready for them to be played next turn for a wide play.
This takes me back.
And of course I don't get to use the Mysteria much here, so I really just wanted to try and take the board before next turn as much as I could and force some hopeful trades next turn that would really limit what they could do against my Snowmen. Fortunately, that's pretty much a perfect card to have there. Lancer of Tempest is great for removing things, so not too surprising. But my Snowmen now pretty much have free face damage. We can go 4 to the face with a full board that's going to be hard to remove. It should stick pretty nicely. Another Frontline Cavalier though.
It won't be long now.
Definitely going to heal them right back up.
Victory or death.
Lovely day for a fight.
Which is a little disappointing. I would have liked to have dealt with this better. We do have another Snowman, so we could immediately follow up with that if need be.
Sleep forever. Back to the castle. So sorry.
So our Chain Lightning does deal 4 damage, which gives us an option, especially since we now have 2 of them, so using 1 is actually pretty reasonable if we want to. Do decide to focus on getting that Mysteria spell first, and then going for the Chain Lightning, killing the 4/4. And this time, being able to send some more damage to the face should actually be pretty good.
It's getting hot!
Also decided to remove the 2-2. It's only going to leave these at 1-1, which is actually pretty good considering we have Snowman follow-up to deal with these 1-2-2s that are filling our board at this point. Lancer though coming down again, getting a little bit of work in. So these matches do tend to drag on a fair bit, so your negative matchups tend to be against Rune and Haven. Sword, Blood, and a few other decks actually deal fairly reasonably. Of course, the one advantage you do have against something like Rune and Haven is that they don't play very wide boards, excluding of course when Haven does go off with its absolutely nuts hand. So you can actually just ping off a few things every turn and build up to your bigger turns. The biggest risk against other Runecraft decks is Giant Chimera. Giant Chimera can be an absolute nightmare to deal with.
Don't get too carried away.
So we haven't seen Arthur, which is great. We do get to see Roland come down though, so this might be a more of a control sword variant, which really isn't a problem for my deck. We don't tend to deal more than 4 damage from a single thing in general. Most of my spells will deal somewhere between 2 and 4 damage each time. And we can actually boost up the Mysteria spells quite well. Being able to get a couple of damage off this. And even a little bit more damage from the Mysterious Circle. So we get to put them to 10 pretty quickly. I found the Mysteria card here, the 3-drop, a little awkward to play in most of my matchups. I'm not sure whether I do want to continue to run it or not. It does have the Mysteria synergy, but overall it just felt clunky, which I didn't really like.
Let us learn about magic.
Of course, I can go for the Wizard of Oz here. It does allow me to at least use my Mysteria cards and stuff if I need to.
There will be no homework.
Fortunately, if I had thought about that first, I actually could have just played the Mysteria card, then used Nova Flare, would have procced my other guy and got us an extra card that we probably would have lost due to losing Oz anyway, but it would have been the correct play and line of play to go for, so do keep that sort of thing in mind. Nova Flare can be tricky to play if you do forget what it does in particular, and if you forget that your followers are going to be immediately destroyed by it. So, I make a small error with Staff of Whirlwinds. Really should have thrown that to the face instead. Would have been 100 times better. We actually would have been very close to a lethal, I think, at that point. Actually, it may have been lethal due to the way it works. And I don't believe it's limited to followers, so you can throw it to the face. It's a huge error on my part, just forgetting what Black Queen does, protecting their followers, and I was trying to focus on removing the board, so... You know, a small amount of misplays, only human. Looking back on them, it's very easy to see where I went wrong. But most things turn out well in the end for this deck, especially when you're low on cards. I mean, the Chain Lightning alone was enough to end this game anyway, when we drew that. And we run so many spells that the odds of getting one that was going to win us the game was fairly high when we drew Oz. So our next game is against Portal, another one of the probably top 3 decks at the moment, at least as of making this video. Do keep in mind I am about a week ahead, so I'm sure these decks will change and evolve, and the meta will evolve as well. But for the most part, we should be settling into a meta now where things shouldn't be shaken up too much until we see some form of nerf or change that will really affect the game. So most of these decks should stay consistently good. So we don't get too much going on. I mean, the Witch is actually pretty reasonable. We can get a nice draw off it. I do like drawing spells. I wish there were more Mysterious spells that we could take advantage of with the followers. I feel like stuff like Staff should have been a Mysterious spell, or Absolute Zero Blade should have been a Mysterious spell. Those would have been great things to have in that case. They could have called it, you know, Staff of Mysteria or something and made it all fancy, but hopefully we get more Mysterious spells in the future. So your substitution, building up their puppets, and they get a pretty easy trade. So the Portal player started off really strongly, basically forcing me to use my Nova Flare early because I don't want them to use Evolved Icarus and deal 4 to face and get artifact advantage out of it. I really couldn't afford for that to happen, especially when they could play something else like this Ironforge Fighter.
Let us learn about
And I can actually take advantage of Mysteria for once. I don't usually take advantage of this guy often, but when I do, it is quite a huge advantage to have. Whichever Mysteria card you pull in this kind of deck actually does fairly well due to the fact that the Mysteria combinations work out really nicely, and wards actually can be taken advantage of pretty well. But we did get the better of the two with Missile. Missile obviously is still the better of the two just because you are spell boosting, thus you're both doing more damage to followers and to face. Although I do still like golems. Golems can be quite good when you need them.
Eureka!
Like in this case, this golem manages to put this thing within a decent range. So this is one of my kind of misplays. I shouldn't have played Witch of the Forest and then Nova Flare. I should have Nova Flared, then Witch. Would have left me with the 1-2 up. At the same time, it also would have left them with a target, but I feel like that still would have been the better way to go about this. So I really don't have much going for me in this hand. I've got enough to clear stuff repeatedly, but other than that, I don't really have any way to start snowballing the game into my favour, and that's what made this game so awkward and difficult to play out. I really needed to take advantage of what I had when I had it. Getting Absolute Zero Blade, the cheaper of the two, to remove it, trying to keep the large one in case we see a Saphira play later on. I want a way to deal with Saphira effectively, or Magna Legacy, or something just bigger. And luckily we did save our bigger Absolute Zero Blade. It worked out really well thinking to save for the Saphira play, because I believe the Absolute Zero Blade we have here was either 9 or 10, which was more than enough to deal with this.
The inconsolable voice.
I can also use the Chain Lightning now, due to the fact that it will go back to my hand. And we hopefully are able to save the President Hannah long enough to use with the Mysteria cards. A couple of ancient artifacts, really flooding the board with them at this point.
You're through.
Even evolving one. Unfortunately, our Staff of Whirlwinds isn't going to kill this entire board, but it will remove all those artifacts really well. Although it does mean things like Magna Legacy and Saphira now get a huge boost. And we also do another staff, which is great considering we're fighting Portal. Two key cards against Portal and Sword are both our staff and our Nova Flare. They're huge advantages to have. And because we have Absolute Zero Blade and the draw effect of it, I can actually use the Absolute Zero Blade with the Evolved Hannah here, which is why I use the Evolve on the Hannah, to really take advantage of that draw. I was really looking to get a few of my better cards into my hand as fast as I could. Plus, a 6/6 is harder to deal with for Portal. They will require at least a minimum of 2 artifacts or a few other cards, and luckily they have been stacking puppets for quite a long time, so majority of their hand were puppets, so that was not too much of a worry for me. Really at this point, Subjugation or a artifact were the only 2 options they had to clear this out effectively, and they did have a substitution, which is great. It means they do get their puppet, but they only have 1 other card in hand, and no Deus Ex Machina yet, so we can really start taking advantage of our cards. We have 3 Chain Lightnings now, so no point on bouncing those back anytime soon. The Radiant artifact is a little bit of a problem. I mean, it goes face pretty quickly. We get another Hannah, which means we can use the Mysterian Right effectively and get what we need out of it. Although the Mysterian Right can also go face for a good amount of damage, but removing that Storm was extremely important. Now we get to see the Magna Legacy play. A card that basically has to be removed at this point, as I can't go for lethal yet. And unfortunately, it is going to cost me some of these cards here. So being able to use the Chain Lightning on it, just because it does return to my hand, is a little bit better than using the Mysterian Right. Even though the Mysterian Right would have protected me from some Storm damage, which honestly, thinking about it, would have been the better way to go, because if they had Saphira, I could have been in some real trouble here. But at the same time, it means I can use this next turn to protect myself just as well. We do get the Mysteria Founder, which is fairly good. Being able to use this ward setup as well should work out. So with 2 cards in their hand, one of which I believe is still a puppet, so now they only have 2. They do go for the Deus Ex Machina play though. Not much for that one though. I really, like, Deus Ex Machina took up most of their points. They've now flooded their board completely. My only worry is that they have a couple more artifacts, which, considering we know they have a puppet, wasn't going to happen. And we have an easy lethal now with the 4/4 left on board, and even just one Chain Lightning at this point would have been enough to just repeatedly kill them.
This is grave.
Really close game, but worked out really nicely, limiting all their resources, so very happy with how that played out. So I hope you guys did enjoy this video. Mysteria is a very fun deck. It does lead to some very close games. Would I recommend it for laddering? If you're in the early stage, sure. If you're in Master, probably not. You're probably better off sticking to something like Sword or Haven or Portal as your primary source to get to Grandmaster. But if you are just looking for something different and you have the cards to build this deck, give it a go. It's a lot of fun, and really that's all you really want. If you're not going for Grandmaster, why not just have some fun with the deck for a little bit, complete your dailies, and enjoy it. So if you want to check this out, deck list will be in the description below. You can hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya.